Greetings, members, one and all of the Salivation Nation. We are in a new phase of inflation, and silver is directly impacted. This may be one of my most important videos for 2022. Let's explore. We all know and have been frustrated with silver's performance over the past year or so. And what's been most frustrating about it is that silver spot price has stayed low while the premiums have gone way high. I'm kind of cautious to use the word skyrocket, but I think many of us could probably suggest that that is what's happening to premiums with silver. There's a lot of different things that are in play here. And what we are seeing right now is the shifting of the phases of inflation. You know, many people talk about hyperinflation, which I don't think we're going to see in this country. We're going to see different levels of inflation. It went from transitory to now this new phase. And we're going to be referencing an article from the Blaze News that about from different policymakers. These are actually Democrats that I'm referring to, both of them, that talk about what is going on with inflation and who's to blame. And there's some parts of this article that it doesn't touch on that I think that most of us understand the primary cause for it. But again, some of these policymakers, they don't want to go there. But nonetheless, I think there is some truth here in this piece. And we're going to be referring to Jason Furman, who was a former top economic advisor for President Barack Obama. And essentially, much of the administration's blame for these high inflationary prices is corporate greed. And you see that a lot in the precious metals community too, blaming corporate greed, which is kind of ironic because most of us, we don't really fall into the measure of Democratic talking points, but it happens in this community where we blame bullion dealers. We say that they are the ones that are gouging people with their prices, but that you could not be further from the truth. So Furman says that corporate greed is a bad theory of inflation. He is now a Harvard University professor. I think almost everything other than the Federal Reserve is a sideshow when it comes to the dynamics of inflation. And so that is interesting that he mentions the Federal Reserve here. That's the only mention we'll see in this article. He goes on to say the main reason prices go up is companies are trying to make as much as they can. They just can't make enough to satisfy everything that people want, Furman continued. Again, this is a Democratic strategist, economic strategist. When that happens, prices go up. If they didn't go up, we'd have even worse shortages right now. And that's exactly right, folks. He hit the nail on the head. This happens whether or not there is inflationary pressures outside of the supply and demand. It's really kind of what it's about. The less supply, typically the prices go up. And then when there's great demand for that supply, they go up even more. And that's what we saw through the pandemic. We saw it with pretty much most every commodity, but especially silver. And it reflected in a different way with silver than some of these other commodities. In other words, when there's a great demand for something, it's got no choice but to go up. And if it didn't, there would be even greater shortages, which would cause an even greater problem. So that's the natural market forces at play, folks. It's not greed. And that is just the name of the game. Of course, people will say that I'm an apologist for the precious metals dealers out there. But you know what? People have accused Republicans of being in the pockets of the big businesses as well. That's essentially a Democrat talking point. Another former Obama economic advisor cautioned against Biden blaming corporate greed for inflation and went so far as to say that continuing to do so puts the U.S. at risk of a recession. And that's an important point here because what we are seeing with inflation is the threat of a recession. Lawrence Summers, who served as the Secretary of the Treasury under former President Bill Clinton and was the director of the National Economic Council under Obama, warned the Biden administration. Misdiagnosis of the problem around greed or around particular sectors raises the risk that ultimate recession will be necessary. So essentially, that's exactly right. It's a misdiagnosis of the problem will actually make things worse if you don't understand where the problem lies and how to fix it. I think that's the same thing many of us should take into account in the precious metals community too. When we blame bullion dealers for, quote, price gouging, it's misdiagnosed. It's misdirected outrage. And again, that's just it. There's a lot of factors that come into play in terms of the price and premiums. Premium is not just one price. It is not just one monolithic entity. There's a lot that goes into these premiums, and people need to understand that. It's quite important, especially for those of us who stack silver. Every time a Washington policymaker suggests that this is caused by corporate greed or some such, they're delaying the date at which we will achieve the credibility necessary to bring down inflation with stable employment, Summers said on Bloomberg Television's Wall Street Week. I think the data flow is saying what I've thought for quite some time, that yes, there are transitory elements in inflation. And I actually agree with that too. There are some transitory elements, but very likely they will recede. But we are basically moving towards higher entrenched inflation. That's the first time you're hearing that, at least I've heard that from many economists, that we've essentially moved into entrenched inflation, which is very different than hyperinflation, by the way. And again, I think, and many people say hyperinflation, that's essentially kind of the fear tactic, thinking that we're somehow related to Venezuela. We are not Venezuela. And it's going to be quite some time before we get to that kind of level of problems. We have a lot of cushion in this country because of the private sector and because of the free market enterprise system that is protected, which means that we can take a lot more blows like this for a lot longer period of time. In many ways, that's kind of the problem, which is why modern monetary theorists and Keynesians feel emboldened, because of the backbone of what makes this country great, and that is the free market. That is the private sector. That's you and me, folks, people who have small businesses, people who have large businesses, people who have worked hard to keep the economy flowing. And that is what keeps everything together, folks. And so far, that has not been totally dismantled yet, although they are moving as fast as they can to try to transition into a different kind of economy. And that is scary. We must certainly fight back against that, because what is it about? It is about people. And I believe that people, no matter what your political stripe may be, people are the answer to problems, not government entities or even big business aligned with government and their personal interest. And it's about the interest of control of us all, essentially. We have a massive overheated labor market, Summers explained. We have the highest ratio of vacancies to unemployment in the country's history by a large margin. We have shortages of labor in everything from psychotherapy to McDonald's, and everything from investment analysts to gardeners. It suggests a surfeit of purchasing power and demand relative to the capacity of the economy to produce, and unless we bring those things into balance, we're going to have not just higher inflation, but possibly even accelerating inflation. And so he's careful with his words there, not to say that it is hyperinflation, but an accelerating level of inflation is quite a possibility. Keep in mind, these are Democratic strategists we're talking about here. And so labor shortages and being a major pattern here in the United States are something that is a problem, and that affects the precious metals sector as well too. Getting enough employees to be able to produce these products such as that you see here before you. So we need to recognize that we have an overheated economy that we are going to need to essentially cool off to some point, and it could crash very quickly. That would not be good if that occurs. So it's one of those things that, with regards to precious metals, they're affected too, and the producing of these precious metals are affected. Are affected. This is a silver bar that was produced back when silver was much lower in price, or at least I bought it when it was much lower in price. In terms of the premium, in terms of the spot price, everything. And so the cost to produce this was at a time when the dollar was much stronger and much more recognized, and as the ultimate currency. Of course, it still is today, but everybody is hurting. Every currency is hurting. And so when you have things like silver rounds and the like that were produced at a time when silver spot price was much lower, and the premiums were much lower in some instances. Now there have been times when the spot price has been much lower and the premiums much higher in percentage in comparison. We've actually seen that before too. But nonetheless, it is noteworthy that the premiums are rising and the spot price is not rising along with it. We are never going to see, I believe, premiums get back to where they were before the pandemic. I believe they're entrenched in there, and that's largely due to inflation. That's right, folks, and that's not what's being talked about. High premiums on things like eagles are because they are in high demand, and so therefore, and the price that makes up these silver eagles in terms of the premium is continuing to go up from the very beginning. In other words, the price is up from the United States Mint to its brokers, to its authorized purchasers, to premiums that are added to it in order to keep things going in terms of the cost to operate business, which are increasing for a lot of these bullion dealers. The cost to stay in business is rising. That's inflation on all fronts. It affects everything, absolutely everything, in terms of the production, in terms of the distribution, in terms of shipping, in terms of fuel cost. Every aspect of it comes into part. That is why premiums are rising, as well as increased demand. Coupled increased demand for silver, add that to rising costs of pretty much everything. That means that premiums have no choice but to go up. And not only to go up in terms of their price and percentage, because spot price isn't going up, but I think they will continue to rise. As prices rise, as the spot price goes up, you're going to see an even greater demand for silver, which means that there's going to see even probably higher premiums at that point. We have 7% year over year based off the consumer price index for inflation. That does not account for fuel. That does not account for highly volatile items that are normally volatile outside of inflationary pressures. They're even more volatile and even higher now. So those are the things you must take into account and consider when stacking silver and holding silver. So I believe this is one of those situations where you must assess how you buy. You must be agile. I think for me, the premiums are just too high for silver eagles. And I think a lot of that has to do with the demand. So therefore, for me, for my money, I'm probably going to not buy silver eagles if I'm a hardcore stacker. I'll find some other government bullion product that is just as recognized, nearly as liquid, such as the Britannia here. The Britannia is a highly recognizable bullion coin, and it is beautiful, attractive, has great security features. I think they do a better job than the U.S. Mint. So my money is on those, or Maple Leafs, or some other government-issued bullion. And that's part of what the free market is about. You talk with your pocketbook, with your wallet. Let that drive get the best value for your money. But I think it's important to understand where we are at with this new phase of inflation. It is essentially entrenched, folks. Entrenched inflation is what is driving us. And that means that premiums will be entrenched as well for silver. I believe it's also a lesson that to hold silver, because I believe sooner or later we are going to see the spot price catch up to where probably it should be in due course. Will that be this year? I'm not sure. I'm fairly bullish on it. But again, I can't stress enough, folks, that the high premiums that we're seeing for silver are in part or mostly due to inflation. And it's not been talked about a whole lot in this community, but I think it should. It's affecting everything, folks, and silver is included. That means that, if you understand what those premiums are, what they are made of, then, shop around, still find the best deal, but continue to stack as your budget allows. So there you go. Hope you found this video useful. I would like to extend a multitude of gratitude to you all for taking the time to watch, and to encourage you to please rate, share, comment, and subscribe.